To you. All right, so welcome everyone to this evening's lecture. My name is Jing Liu. I am the Executive Director of the Michigan Institute for Data and AI in Society, or as we call it, MIDAS. And so the Data and AI in Society lecture series is something that we just started in February. Really, the goal is to connect scholars at the forefront of thinking about, of researching data and AI and their impacts on society, and with the campus and also the general public, and together think about some really important issues as AI is shaping our society at such a speed that really has caught everyone by surprise. But we really need to think about the big issues in order for us to actually shape AI to shape our society. And so, but I will give a very brief intro about MIDAS. So MIDAS is a campus-wide organization that enables the development of data science and AI methodology and their application for to really maximize scientific impact and also societal impact. So three big things that we do. One is to facilitate, to enable, and to lead research in this space, and also train the current research workforce to upskill, and so that they can better develop data science and AI and also deploy them. Also, we build collaboration broadly with academia, industry, and government in this space as well. A couple of things I want to mention. One is, if you're interested in building skills, we offer, this year we offer 5 weeks of summer academies, from introductory data science and AI methods to advanced topics. I'm told to mention that April 16 is the priority deadline. Also, this series, there are 2 upcoming lectures in this series before summer. So as you can see here, on April 24th, there's another lecture on generative AI and sexual harm, and end of May it's about AI and the jobs. Okay, so this is the April 24th. If you would like to sign up, that's highly recommended. Go to the same website that you signed up for this lecture and sign up for the next one. Okay, so for today, I'm really happy to introduce Betsey Stevenson, Professor of Public Policy and Economics at the University of Michigan. So Dr. Stevenson is a labor economist whose research is broadly on the labor market and the impact of public policy on the labor market. So more specifically, she studies the economic forces shaping the modern family, women's labor market experiences, and how these experiences and the economic forces on the family influence each other. So beyond academia, Betsey is actually very active in the public domains. If you watched or read news in the past few days, you could actually see her interviews on the current issues of tariffs. She was a member of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, where she advised on social policy, labor markets, and trade issues. And prior to that, she was the chief economist of the U.S. Department of Labor from 2010 to 2011, and she advised the Secretary of Labor on labor policy. She also served as the Secretary's deputy to the White House economic team. She was also a member of the Biden-Harris transition team at the U.S. Treasury. So as AI becomes such a big force in society, Betsey is a leading researcher on how AI will shape the workforce, the economy, and research and innovation. So she's really one of the best speakers for today's topic. During the lecture, you're welcome to ask questions, but because we're recording the lecture, you should raise your hand. And if the timing is right, Betsey would like to answer your question in the middle of the lecture, we will pass a mic for you. And if possible, also you can save the questions till the end of the lecture, and our team will pass the mics around in the room. So with that, I'd like to ask you all to join me and welcome Professor Betsey Stevenson.
Do you know? Oh. Okay. So it is true that when I agreed to this date, I did not think about it in terms of Liberation Day and what that might mean for as a demand shock for my time to try to explain the unexplainable, which was a shift towards worldwide tariffs. I would say today I had an interview on CNN, and they said, did President Trump pull back some of the tariffs yesterday because of market reactions? And I said that I thought the only time I had ever agreed with President Trump was when he said, we got to do something because people are getting yippy. Because I was definitely getting yippy. And I think a lot of people were. But that's the last I'll say on that, although I'll forgive you if you ask questions, because I do think there are some interactions about how we feel about globalization, about trade, about interacting with other people, and thinking about what might happen in our AI future. So today I sort of want to lay out what I see as the path for us. But I do think it's one that is full of uncertainty. And I've got some students here from my AI and policy class, so I'm both going to be challenged to see if I say anything that they didn't already know. But I will start by saying something that they definitely know, which is that I do think a lot of what happens will be dependent on the policy choices that we make going forward. And that's pretty much the last thing I'm going to say about policy in my presentation, because I want to lay out what I think the issues are, and then we can talk about policy issues in the Q&A. So this is not controlling this. Okay. I think there's going to be 3 stages of AI in work. And the 3 stages are our jobs evolving in a way that might make us feel pretty productive, at least some of us. And then, our jobs changing, really sort of dramatic, no longer evolving, but expanding. Some jobs will disappear, new jobs will arrive. And the fear is stage 3, replacement, when we actually no longer have much of value to provide. I want to focus mostly on stages 1 and 2. And I think for everybody in this room, not just those of you my age and older, but even the youngsters, I think you're going to mostly be living through stages 1 and 2. So don't get yourself too worried about stage 3. But I think we want to think about stage 3 in developing policy, which is why I want to lay out what a stage 3 could look like. So the first thing we got to do is talk about what AI is. And it is a little bit like these nice hats these kids are wearing that are giving them all sorts of thinking power, but not really. So I think the most important thing to wrap your head around, because this is not a talk on what AI is and what AI isn't, but to understand that AI provides us predictive powers that we've never had before. It's our ability to predict predict things that means that our uses for predictions might change dramatically, right? So all of a sudden, AI, by taking in a lot of information, being able to calculate a lot of math, it is to prediction what calculators and computers were to computation. And I think if you keep that idea in the back of your head, it'll help you understand the ways in which our jobs will evolve and then potentially expand And then, of course, the further risks. So computer code was about explicit instructions transforming inputs to outputs for codified knowledge. AI can infer instructions from examples, and it can be used for tacit knowledge. So what is fundamentally changing is what we used to have to gain through lived experience can be gained without lived experience. That's the big innovation, but what does that mean for how we're going to use it? And I want to start by pointing out that major innovations don't often deliver productivity growth, meaning they don't change our jobs that much until work has been reorganized around them. And it often takes a very long time for work to get reorganized around a new technology. So I like to start by thinking about the Industrial Revolution. And those of you who spent a lot of time with your Marx Engels reader know about the Engels pause. Or maybe you even went to the primary sources and read lots of Engels. But the Engels pause was pointing out that we had the Industrial Revolution, and we saw a lot of people take advantage of these new technologies to make a lot of money. But workers' wages were flat for quite a long time. That's what the Engels pause is. It's about the fact that the typical worker saw stagnant wages while an industrialist class got wealthy. This was because there was a struggle to accumulate the capital necessary to make workers a lot more productive. So we had a half century of capital accumulation that also went with wage stagnation to kick off the Industrial Revolution. Let me point out again, a half century, 50 years. So lots of people, they were born as this new technology was taken off, and they ended their working life before it had really generated gains to the median person, the typical person. That's, of course, the 1700s. What about electricity? Electricity, and so here you can see that it took roughly 60 years before we really reorganized work around the steam engine. We were a little faster with electricity, and it took about 30 years to reorganize work around electricity. So but still 30 years, right? If you had been born, or, if you had come of age and say turned 20 at the time that electricity was invented, it hadn't really reorganized work by the end of your working life. Now, personal computers have been a little bit faster, and this one, anyone my age or older in this room, sort of lived through this. When I went to graduate school in economics, the saying was, one can see the computer age everywhere but the productivity statistics. That was considered a great productivity slowdown in the United States. We weren't seeing, workers were getting all these, we could see the computers on their desks. IBM was helping us lay them all out in the 80s, but it wasn't making workers more productive, so it wasn't really generating big gains. The question is, will AI be faster than these other inventions? It might be. So I'm not trying to say 10 years. I would say a big unknown. We don't know how long it will take to revolutionize work, although there's many reasons to think it might be much faster than these previous technological innovations. But there is a limit to humans, no matter how good the technology is. I think electricity is pretty awesome. There is a limit to humans' ability to both invest in, to prioritize their spending away from the stuff they're spending that is feeding them and nourishing them and putting a roof over their head and generating profits if you're a company, to something brand new and reorganizing work and training people how to use it, those things take time because people take time. Yet, AI adoption there are reasons to believe it might be the fastest we've ever seen, because software is not physical, APIs are modular and connective, uses a natural language. There are barriers that remain: chip shortages, energy bottlenecks, and of course, the missing policy piece of understanding how we are going to treat AI, even something as simple as, should these large language models be training on copyright material or not? Is that a fair use or not a fair use? Is a not yet determined policy question. And yet ChatGPT is the fastest ever to 100 million users. So if we think about other forms of of new technological advances that should be pretty simple to use, ChatGPT got to 100 million users in just 2 months. So how should we start to think about what this is going to do and mean for workers? Well, the big question is, should we think about this as ChatGPT, AI, machine learning, that these technological advances are going to be a substitute for workers, or are they going to be a complement augmenting workers? And if you talk to a lot of the economists who are thinking about this issue and worried about what will happen, they will point to the importance of making sure that AI augments work, that it works hand in hand with people. And as I'm going to show you in a little bit, this has been the key to understanding how economists think about AI, is that historically, when we create stuff, our GDP comes from combining human beings with their knowledge, with capital, and you take that together with some innovation or recipe for creating stuff, but it's always human beings plus capital. We haven't yet thought about what if it would be human beings or capital. That would be a real change. That would be a full substitute. So that, if something like that were to happen, is far in the future. But we do know that there will be some tasks where AI might be a substitute, and others where it might be a complement. So I want you to be thinking about these ideas of, is AI substituting what a worker can do, or making that worker more efficient? Another really, really important dimension to thinking about how AI will shape work is cost. When you hear technologists talk about everything AI is going to do, they forget that at the end of the day, what's really going to matter is, how much does a person cost? How much does a machine cost? And it's not just because a machine can even do it better and faster doesn't mean that machine is necessarily going to be the one that does it. There are lots of places all over the world where there are people still doing things that machines can do quite well. And how do we decide whether we have a human at the loom or we're running a mechanical loom? Well, it's thinking about costs. And I said I wasn't going to talk too much about tariffs, but this is exactly what's going on when we're thinking about, are we going to get manufacturing back in the United States? And why the Secretary of Commerce said, well, yeah, we can get garment manufacturing back in the US, we just won't use any people in the factories because the factories will be fully automated. What we're currently doing with a lot of the stuff we currently buy is, there's a choice for whether it should be automated or whether there should be people involved. And there's a lot of lower income countries that are happy to have people with jobs. And so they use less technology, more people. Not all of them. But this idea that costs matter is very important. So it's not going to be just, can the AI do it? But can the AI do it more cheaply? Okay, so these are the three phases in the evolution of work. The short run, what we're going to see is task replacement. And this is the way economists have thought about how jobs have evolved through the history of time, which is if you look at how jobs have evolved, they start off with, it's not, you don't get up one day, go to work and say, we've laid you off because a computer just took your job. It's you go to work and your job changes. We need you to do this and you don't need to do this part anymore. As time goes on, if there are more and more tasks taken by, if there are more and more tasks that are taken by technology, then you will need fewer and fewer people doing the job. So we might see some jobs start to shrink. We also might see jobs evolve in a way that's quite dramatic. So they look dramatically different than they did when they first started. And probably the quintessential example that I know my students have heard, and many of you might have heard before, is if you think about bank tellers. Right? I am actually old enough to remember going to the bank with my mom as a little kid, standing in a long line and saying, I would like $240 for the week, please. Could I have that half in 10s and half in 20s? And the teller's job was to take the money out of your account and give you some cash. And that's all they did all day long. I remember once watching a Saturday Night Live skit about how do you make money when all you're doing is giving people their money back. The job of the teller, though, and that's how you bank. If you're going to put money in the bank, you need to be able to get access to your money. That's the fundamental idea of banking. And there were human beings who gave you access to your money. When automatic teller machines came along, people first said, people feel too deeply about their money to trust a machine to access their account and give them cash. They'll never trust it. But it's pretty convenient to get your money out of an ATM. And it took a little while, but people shifted over to the ATM. So you might think all those bank tellers got fired. They didn't. There's actually more bank tellers working today than there ever were. What? What are they doing? They're opening new accounts. They're convincing you that you should put your money away in some certificate of deposit. They're selling you different products. They're thinking about whether they can bring you to the bank for a loan. They have other more sophisticated tasks. And guess what? Those tasks make more money for the bank than giving you your cash. And because those tasks make more money for the bank than giving you your cash, they make more money than they used to make. So the job is, there's as many people employed in the bank as there were back when they were giving you cash, but now these people are higher paid. So that's like the classic example of task replacement and job evolution. Now the problem is that, as Eric Brynjolfsson said quite succinctly, unlike most advances in automation in the past, it's a machine of the mind affecting cognitive work. And I think that this fact that it's affecting cognitive work is going to cause jobs to evolve in a way that we might feel more worried about. So AI is going to change your job, and the question's going to be, can you change along with it? So if we want to think in the short run who the winners and losers are going to be, the winners are going to be the people who evolve along with the way that AI evolves the job, and the losers will be the ones who do not. And so across many professions, people who embrace using AI tools to be more productive, companies that embrace using AI tools to be more productive will be the winners, and the losers will be the ones that are more reluctant to do so. So let's take a look at some of the productivity enhancements you can get today by using AI. This is a series of studies I'm going to show you the results of. The first was a study that had a control group that was assigned with implementing an HTTP server using JavaScript. And the control group, so all the coders were asked to do the same coding task. The control group was told they could use the internet, but not AI, to get some help with their work. The treatment group was told they could also use GitHub and Copilot. And what they found was the average time to complete the task fell from 161 minutes to 71 minutes. Now, there was a recent article in the New York Times where she called this mid. And I'm like, doesn't feel mid to me. Feels like a huge productivity boost. And I want to tell you, I had my own little burst of understanding of this year. So I teaching an intro economics class, and I was trying to upload my grades to GSI. To Canvas. I was just saying, this is the first time I've taught an intro class without a GSI. That's a complicated story that you do not want to hear. But this is the first time I've done it without a GSI. So I'm like, I don't know how this Canvas thing works. And I go to Google. I'm like, well, I will Google what I need to do to make it so my students can see their midterm results on Canvas. And I Google it, and all this stuff comes up, and it's taking me forever, and I'm trying this, and it's not working. And I'm like, we live in a world of AI. Why is this taking me so long? And then I was like, oh, because I'm not using AI. And I opened ChatGPT, and I said, here's what I want to do. Here's what I've tried. Nothing's worked so far. What should I do? And it told me exactly what to do, and I got it done in 30 seconds after that. So that is exactly that was that experiment. Right? What happens when you're just trying to Google it and you're like, there's a Reddit thread here somewhere I can read? That takes a long time. The AI already read it for you and is going to tell you exactly what to do. ChatGPT led office workers to do professional writing tasks 40% faster. So this was an experiment where they gave college-educated professionals who were recruited to do things like write press releases, short reports, analysis plans, delicate, meaning, sensitive or, complicated emails. And they were paid for producing quality work. So they were assessed on quality. The randomly assigned treatment group was instructed to sign up for ChatGPT 3.5, while the control group was not. What they found was that the task took the control group 27 minutes and took the treatment group 16 minutes. So I want you to think about this. Again, I thought about this when it was the New York Times columnist called this stuff mid. Is imagine most of the people in this room who probably sit at a computer and do something desk-related. Now imagine if you got everything done with 40% more time left over at the end of the day. What would you do with it? Right? It's actually quite big to be able to have a few extra hours in your day to do something else. And then here's one where we can all agree might be a little mid. AI assistant led online customer service staff to resolve issues 14% faster. So the average time to close a customer support ticket to a customer customer service rep who's not using AI is 28 minutes. To one who has access to an AI assistant, it's 25 minutes. So it's only a little bit, this was only a little bit faster. The one thing that was really striking about all of these findings, though, across all of these studies, the gains came not from the most productive workers becoming even more productive. They tended to come from the least productive workers catching up in productivity to the most productive workers. And this is one reason why some people are optimistic that maybe AI can actually help reduce inequality. If you think inequality is driven by some people are lucky and they're born with some inherent skills, or maybe throughout the course of their life they've gotten some extra training, and those skills mean they're just a bit more productive, and because they're more productive they're more likely to get a raise, and because they get that raise then they're more productive, and then they get another promotion, and we get inequality. But if we level the bottom up, maybe what we end up with is a reduction in inequality. I would argue if we get that, that is happening in the short run, not necessarily the medium run and the long run. And I'll explain why as we go forward. So which jobs are most vulnerable to being automated by AI? In the short run, the way to think about this right now is we can look at all the tasks that any given occupation has, and there is data that sort of breaks occupations down by tasks, and then we can figure out what % of those tasks might be done by an AI. And so there's this nice paper that by Elwin Manning, Mishkin, and Rock that looked at task by task, what's the chance AI could do the tasks in this job? Now, I say this is the short run analysis because it's very static. It's like, this is what we all do right now every day. Nothing else changes, but what's the probability AI can do it? And what they say is 80% of workers have at least 10% of their tasks that could potentially be impacted by AI. Now, in a lot of ways, this is good news because this means that everybody could get a productivity boost by AI, right? So if it was, very few workers who could have any, they argue that 50% of workers have more than 50% of their tasks affected, which doesn't mean replaced. And so what you see is there are some jobs where potentially 100% of tasks could be automated, like translators or web designers. It says it says survey researchers. I was like, because I think there's some debate here, right? And again, it means what they're looking for is, could AI do any part of this task? Which is not the same thing for saying, can AI do this task without human involvement? But what it does mean is that there is going to be uneven effects across sectors. So there is likely to be a huge impact on office and administrative support, legal, that's, architecture and engineering, life, physical and social science, business and financial operations, but probably, less of an effect on arts and entertainment, personal services, food prep, transportation, et cetera. So first of all, one of the things you see is the ones that are likely to have a big impact from AI are the sort of high-skill tasks. And that is why there's a lot of hand-wringing in wondering, well, what will this mean for our most skilled workers? Like, should we just all give up going to college because the robots are going to take our jobs? And I would argue, no. So certainly what will happen, at least in the short run, is people are still going to be in these jobs, and they're going to have productivity-enhancing technology, meaning that they can generate a lot of value. When you can generate a lot of value, you can generate a high wage. That is typically what today a college-educated worker earns 80% more than somebody with, so a basic undergraduate degree of any sort, no graduate degree at all, earns 80% more than somebody with a high school degree. The college wage premium is at a near all-time high. That often gets ignored in the discussion about how expensive college has gotten. the returns to college have also grown enormously, meaning that for the typical student, the net present value of going to college, once you take out the cost of college, is over $1 million. So when you're thinking, should I go to college or not go to college? Should I put in that 4 years of work in college? Should I take out the loans? Realize even after you've paid your loans off, you're $1 million better off. And I don't think that's going to disappear. In fact, this might say that that actually grows. So economists believe in the potential for large gains, and that's because there's no time in history when we've seen us being able to produce more with fewer inputs and thought that was bad for society, right? When we can combine our inputs, our humans and our resources and our knowledge and our capital and produce more, we can raise living standards. And so you can see that being asked, rising use of robots and artificial intelligence in advanced countries is likely to create benefits large enough that they could be used to compensate workers who are negatively affected for any lost wages, that you get roughly 80% of economists agreeing. And then when you ask economists to tell you a little bit about their certainty, so we can weight it by their confidence in their answer, you see that number is closer to 90%. So they believe in the potential for large gains, but then when you ask them whether it will have, whether artificial intelligence will have a negative impact on the earnings potential of a substantial number of high-skilled workers in advanced countries, you see that almost none disagree. There's a ton of uncertainty. When you ask them how uncertain they are, they become less certain, right? So we got 50% who are uncertain when they are asked, how certain are you? And then weighted by that. And then you have a solid, 40%, 45% who say, yeah, actually, it is going to have a negative impact on the earnings potentials of substantial numbers of high-skilled workers. So this brings me to a really important point, which is to think about this word skill. And I'm going to start off by saying I think economists have been so sloppy for so long in the way we talk about skills. We talk about skills as if it's like a person has skills or doesn't have skills. No, that is not how skills in the labor market and the economy work. You have skills that the labor market values, or you don't have skills that the labor market values. You could be an incredibly skilled person, but the labor market does not value those skills. I have a friend who is an amazing juggler. It's been really useful at his child's birthday parties. He juggled fire for her. Her friends loved it. He has not made a living as a juggler, even though he's very, very good. Right? And that's because juggling is something that you will have to invest a lot to become a skilled juggler. And you'll also probably have to have some natural born coordination talents, because I'm pretty sure that I could practice juggling every night from here to the end of my life and I'll never want to juggle fire. But just because you invest in it, just because you put a lot of effort into it, just because it's a talent that few other people have, does not mean the market values it. And that is also important for realizing just because you have a lot of value in the market doesn't mean you're better than anybody else, right? Because skills, it's not a ranking of people. It's just, here's what people need and want, and therefore they're willing to pay for, and here's what you invested in and have, and therefore what kind of return can you get? So what does this all mean for inequality? Well, as I said before, I think there's a lot of uncertainty on what this will mean for inequality, and most economists agree with that, including myself. That, roughly 50% say that I'm uncertain about whether this has a measurable impact increasing inequality. And few people disagree, then more people agree. But it could reduce inequality. It could increase inequality. I think the jury's really out on that one. Now, I want to turn to the medium run. And in the medium run, I'm going to tell you for sure jobs are going to go away. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So here's the decline in full-time employed word processors and typists. It's pretty substantial, although there has been a tiny bit of a recovery since pandemic in that field. Not sure why, but you see that probably because everybody's doing so much, I don't know, actually, because of the growth in business and professional services, and the fact that the substantial decline in the pandemic was unusual for everybody. But what you can see is this is just an occupation that's been in free fall, right? We had 300,000-ish people at the turn of this century, and now we're down to below 50,000 people working in this occupation. So we do lose jobs. The service sector expansion is the source of modern job growth. So this is service jobs and goods-producing jobs since 1940. We don't need that much more extra stuff. Like, people point to outsourcing and China. That's not the problem. The problem is as we get richer, what we want is high-quality health. And so we go for health care. We want child care. We want education. We want to go on vacation. We want to be retired. We want services of all sorts. So we, as a sophisticated, rich country, need to be able to have sophisticated, rich services like consulting and tax services and investment advice and entertainment, right? So a third of our exports are services. So even though it's still the case that 2/3 of our exports are things like, oil or goods, it is a very large and growing share of exports. And it has been the source of basically all modern growth in our economy. And that reflects societal changes, right? That's not changing anytime soon. But it's a reminder that just because technology is really what's killed the jobs in manufacturing, right? So manufacturing has become more and more efficient. It's become more productive. And we've seen us being able to produce more and more stuff, but without having to have as many people in the factories. And it's been replaced by an enormous growth in service-providing occupations. One of the examples I like to give is, I showed you how the typists and word processors has gone down. This story really resonates with me because when my grandmother was 20 years old, it was still the Great Depression. It was 1940, and her family was really struggling. They lived in upstate New York, and her father had owned the only grocery store in town, and they were just really financially struggling. And she moved to Buffalo to take a job as a typist. And I've looked her up in the 1940 census, and that year, my grandmother, my 20-year-old grandmother, earned almost as much as her dad did, which I'm sure caused a lot of trauma in that household, but it also kept that household afloat. So if I woke my grandmother up out of her grave and I said, Grammy, that job that saved your family's grocery store, that kept your family afloat, being a typist in a big city, and I know she bought a brand new coat to wear in the big city, which I still own to this day, and she moved to Buffalo all on her own. And I said, if I took that job that saved your family that was so important to you doesn't exist anymore. But don't worry, my dog sees a psychiatrist. I think she would just be mind blown, right? She would just not know how to process that. It's been very helpful for my dog. He's feeling a lot calmer. So we have seen big declines in the past, and they have been good, right? So if we look, this is globally, agriculture's share of world employment fell from 40% to 27% just in the last 20 years. If you look at the United States, it fell from 40% to 2% last century. And that's okay. Most of us are probably pretty glad that getting food is not a big chunk of our day anymore, and that we don't need a large number of people in our community to work on the farms. So we get new and growing occupations as other occupations need fewer and fewer and fewer people, and some even disappear. We get app developers. Actually, I'm going to tell you the truth here. I asked ChatGPT, what do you think are the 3 biggest growing new occupations that didn't exist before this century? And these are the 3 it told me. App developer, mobile software engineer, data scientist, and social media manager influencer. And I was like, okay, ChatGPT, I don't know if I can put influencer on my slide, but I'm going to do it because according to my kids, that's a real job. But this is what the BLS says the fastest growing jobs are. Now, these are growing by percentages, so not necessarily magnitudes of numbers, but, wind turbine service technicians, solar installers, nurse practitioners, not a new occupation, but that's where we're going to see a lot of growth. They've got data scientists, information analysts, medical and health services managers. Medical and health service managers, that might change dramatically if we were to dramatically change our health insurance system. So you can see that jobs evolve, and then new uses pop up, and new things pop up, new things that we need that we can't really imagine right now. And I think that's one of the problems is when we fear AI, we think about the way AI is going to reduce the need for the things we produce today, the same way the green revolution in agriculture or the steam engine or any of the other revolutions in agriculture, it did reduce the need for us to work in agriculture. But that was okay. So this is just sort of more on this idea that some occupations shrink. Labor, sales is shrinking right now. There's actually, sales was a huge job for the last century of the U.S., right? We've all, that job was central to many American families, but that is a declining field because you don't need to be on the road all the time anymore. You don't need to meet people in person. There's information that they can get. We've seen, though, rises in other occupations as well as these new occupations that have arisen since 1940. And this is part of, if you wonder why we need so many people at the Bureau of Labor Statistics thinking about data, is they have to decide when they're going to create whole new categories of occupations and how we're going to sort of keep that consistent with what we've had in the past. But at some point, you got to add, an occupation that is broad enough that we can't sort of jam it into what we used to call something else. And that's what I mean when I say new occupations. So maybe AI will reduce the number of jobs. Maybe that's good, right? Remember Thoreau said the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. Unconscious despair is concealed, even under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play in them, for this comes after work. Maybe Thoreau was right. Maybe we shouldn't put work on such a pedestal that it must be the center of our life. And in fact, even though we still keep work on this pedestal, that somehow we would all be unmoored if we didn't have work, I think it's worth remembering that we actually do work a lot less than previous generations. And we're mostly pretty glad about it. I, for one, think that children should be in school and doing child things and not in factories. And I don't care what kind of bill they're passing in Florida to put kids back to work. I do not think that's a solution to anybody's economic problems when you're in the 21st century in a developed country. We have childhood. We get childhood because we can afford it. You know what else we get because we can afford it? Retirement. Retirement is awesome. And I don't think that we want to see GDP grow because we push everybody over the age of 70 back into the labor force. So we have reduced our hours worked. We've just done it at the bookends of our lives. We've done it so far in childhood, and we've done it in retirement. But I think as we start to think about moving into the second and third stage of AI, we should be asking big questions like, how much work do I need to do? How much work should people do? What should taking time off to raise children look like? What does work mean, and how important is it to orienting us within the community? Because just because we have always emotionally oriented ourselves through our work doesn't mean we have to keep doing that. And I think that what I notice when I talk about this is that idea is harder for men to grok than women, because there's a lot of women, particularly older than me, who watched their mothers never hold a job outside the house, and their mothers had perfectly satisfied lives. Are they happy that there is less discrimination? Absolutely. But can they understand the ways in which you can build community, build satisfaction, build life outside of work? Also absolutely. So this is not the first time we've been through this kind of feeling that maybe work is going to be permanently negatively impacted. Keynes wrote in a very famous piece, it's very short, I highly recommend everybody read it, called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. He was talking, it's 1930, we are being afflicted with a new disease of which some readers may not have heard the name, but of which they will hear a great deal in the years to come. Technological unemployment. Technological unemployment. If you think this is new to AI, Keynes was writing about it 100 years ago. We understood what it meant for jobs to evolve and for workers' tasks to be replaced by machines. And in fact, what Keynes said is basically what I just said to you. Keynes said, what will our children, our grandchildren, do with their time? Because they will be able to have a living standard 6 or 7 times what we have today. They'll be able to have a living standard that only the very elite have today, the top 1 or 2%. And they'll be able to have that with even less work. So what will they do with their time? Turns out he was 100% right on how much economic growth we would have. In fact, he actually underestimated a little bit. Our growth has even been faster than Keynes predicted. Our living standards are higher. But what we didn't do was decide to take a lot more of that for leisure in the way he thought that we would. He sort of predicted, he's like, what more could you want once you have all the stuff that the richest person in 1930 has? Well, it turns out he didn't know about iPhones. Now, Marx had a similar concern back in 1867. His was a little bit more hyperbolic and intense, where he worries that the capitalist system looks at all methods for raising the social productivity of labor are put into effect at the cost of the individual worker. So he's raising the idea that we have this problem that we prioritize productivity over people, and that this causes something that's quite degrading. When you hear people talk about, Marxism, or it's not that it is, I think, actually, Marx hated capitalism. I don't want to say he didn't hate capitalism, but it doesn't have to be in contrast. I think what you want to think about is, what was he so concerned about? And what he was concerned about actually was the decline of people's control over their own work. Like the idea that you would work in a factory and you would just run a machine that would, do the weaving for you instead of using your skills to create something beautiful through hand weaving. That's the kind of thing he was worried about. But isn't that exactly what we're worried about right now when we think about AI? You're not going to take the ideas out of my brain. It's going to come out of some machine's brain. It's the exact same kind of concern. Is this time different? I don't know, but it is worth thinking about the comparisons. So I described this to you already, and I said I was going to come back to it. The real, so this is straight out of my macroeconomics textbook, so I'm just going to introduce you to the basic macro idea of how do we get GDP? How do we get economic growth? We got these three ingredients: physical capital, human capital, and people, and we put them all together into a machine, and we use a recipe in that machine, and out we spit output. And so the question is, when our physical capital allows our workers to be more productive, that's when we think about things as being labor augmenting. So physical capital is not what the AI knows. Physical capital is like the computer on your desk. And then you use that computer on the desk to be more productive as a person. And that's why economists have always thought that anything that increases productivity can only sort of make people better off, because it's going to allow us to make more output, and we're always going to need people in our recipe. Now, the concern some economists have is that what if we get to a point where we just don't need people in the recipe? Like the recipe could be human capital plus physical capital plus the machine knowledge. And machines truly become, machine knowledge becomes a perfect substitute for, say, human knowledge, and even the physical aspect of a machine becomes a perfect substitute for humans. Then it's gonna come down to is, what does it cost to have the human versus what does it cost to have the machine? And then the concern is, could the wages of humans get driven lower and lower and lower, because the only way you'd want to use them is if humans were very, very cheap. That's sort of, I think, the most fearful aspect. And when we put all this together, one question is, okay, but do we still need, maybe we won't even need humans over here, but we're actually going to need humans in coming up with a production function. Meaning we need humans for innovation. And our true economic growth is actually only ever driven by changing this recipe. Once an economy gets developed enough, the only way you can get more growth is investing in new ideas. When you hear all these blah, blah, blah talking heads on TV telling you that we just have to invest in more capital, that's true if you're in a low-income country, if you're India, if you're China, if you're some country that has a GDP per capita under 30,000. That is not true for the United States. We do need capital investment, but we're not going to get a lot of more bang for our growth buck out of having capital investment. And we can always use more skills from people, but again, there's a limit because our public's pretty skilled. So what really generates output growth is new ideas. So one of the biggest questions about the role of AI is no other technology has ever changed the production function. Every other technology has been working over here, making us more productive, changing the inputs, but the recipe, that's all us. And what AI is potentially doing is maybe it's going to come up with more innovative ideas. And perhaps the only study that ever really terrified me about AI was one that was run in a MBA classroom at Wharton, where it's a typical innovation class where the MBA students are asked to come up with a new product idea, and then the new physical product for the college student market that would be likely to retail for less than $50. And then they put the ideas to the test. They took the actual students' ideas with some ideas generated by AI, and they saw what students wanted to actually buy. The average idea by ChatGPT-4 was better than the average idea of the students, and the best ideas were better than the best ideas of the students. So this is important because it's not just like okay, yeah, you got some stinker ideas because you got some students maybe didn't put in as much as they should have. But the average is higher and the top end is higher. So if AI can come up with these new innovative ideas, it might start to change the production function. Now, that's where that's where if you hear these technologists that think like we are on the cusp of a time of abundance, we will have more than we've ever had before, it will be amazing. The reason is they think that we've got this technological revolution that might change our recipes so we become more productive, not just because the AI's the input, but because it's actually the one coming up with new and innovative ideas. This is obviously just one tiny test of innovation, but the very idea that we might be dealing with a technology that actually fosters innovation is itself the most innovative thing we've ever had. Now, I'd like to pause here and remind people that economic growth is good. I'm as concerned about the environment and climate as anybody else. I know you got worries. But I want to remind you what economic growth is about. Economic growth is about producing more with less. Do you know what else you can do? Produce less with even less, right? So economic growth is not about we got to have more. So if we think about the Lorax, the warning of the Lorax was that they just used all those truffula trees to make all those thneeds that people didn't even really need. But the economic growth is about figuring out how you get more thneeds out of a single tree, not use all the trees. And so economic growth is actually also the path to sustainability. Economic growth is the path to being able to produce what we use today with a teeny fraction of the energy that we're using today. So I don't want you to think of economic growth as bad. I want you to understand that economic growth has the potential for enormous good. And then the other thing is, there are a lot of people in the world who are not as well off, who would like to have economic growth. And let me just give you one example of how economic growth has real effects. This is life expectancy in 1800, 1950, and 2015 around the globe. In 1800, there is not a country in the world that has a life expectancy over age 40. They are all in the 20s and low 30s. By 1950, you start to see that there are now countries that have life expectancies in the 50s and in the 60s. And there are still some that have it in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So we see that, what do you see happen? The world you know of, Canada, the United States, Australia, Europe, starts getting life expectancies in the 60s. And they've left behind large parts of the globe, like the continent of Africa, which has life expectancies in the 30s. But by 2015, we have managed to have enormous improvement around the globe. And we see that nobody is stuck in these very low numbers anymore. And that the entire map has shifted to the yellows, greens, and even the blue. Here in Australia, over here, 83, 82 in Canada. The United States, the indication that not all is well with the US economy is that we don't have the life expectancy that Europe, Canada, and Australia has. But it's clear that economic growth has done a lot when you can now expect to live to be 80 years old in large parts of the world, when 200 years ago you might have only lived to be half that. So then, what will AI do to economic growth? I want to walk you through this real quick, because it both has the potential to revolutionize, but then also maybe it'll be ho-hum. And it's kind of funny to me to watch all the debate about everything that's going on in the macroeconomy right now. And this is actually like the real big question. So what could AI do in the short run? Well, AI could transform 20% of all tasks, right? So this is the very short run. Only 23% of these tasks might be able to be cost effectively automated. which means 4.6% of tasks start becoming done by AI. Well, automating a task yields a 27% labor savings, so we get a 1.2% reduction in labor costs. Labor accounts for only 53% of costs. That gives us a 0.66% reduction in production costs. Economists call this a rise in total factor productivity. This gives us what we call capital. If we get some capital deepening, investments in AI, what we could end up with is a 1.1% rise in GDP over the next sort of, in the short run, I think is the right way to say it. So why is everybody not jumping up and down? Why are they out there on Wall Street selling off stocks thinking the net present value of all these companies is plummeting? Because they sort of done this math too. And they know, AI might boost growth over the next 10 years, but not by a ton. Not by as much, even maybe as globalization will shrink it. But what if we get a bit more optimistic and we think, well, it can transform 25% of tasks and all those tasks could be cost effectively automated, then we get an 8% rise. But what I want you to notice is none of this thinks AI is playing a role in innovation. So this is taking our economy static as it is today and then saying, how much faster could we get doing exactly what we're doing today if we start using AI? But if AI starts affecting innovation, these numbers start to become exponential. And so this is why we have way different forecasts of what AI could do. So these are forecasts, the estimated effects of AI on the level of US GDP in 10 years' time. And what you see is the economist Daron Acemoglu, who's very, very negative on AI, thinks we'll get a 1% boost. And then you get like Goldman Sachs over here saying 15%, PwC saying 21%. The average there is 12%. I think the average is probably a better number than Daron's. So how transformative is AI going to be? Is it going to be just another innovation? Is it going to be utterly transformative? Economists tend to be the biggest pessimists and think, maybe better than just another innovation. The technologists think it's going to be utterly transformative. You're going to have to make your own decision as the information comes in. But let me end by just showing you a little bit about where we're currently at. In late 2023, 3.9% of companies had adopted AI. But you can see that actually started taking off. And so if we look in the first half of 2024 and the second half of 2024, you see, and here, this McKinsey survey is broken out by number of tasks. You see a steep rise throughout the year. So if I show you this from late 2023, that's ancient time, because that's sort of where, that's sort of the 55%, 31, 16, and then you see steep rises coming out of that. But perhaps what they also say is they're already starting to evolve work. They're reskilling employees, and even more plan to reskill more employees over the next 3 years due to AI use. And there are some cuts coming. Respondents most often predict that Gen AI use will lead to decreased headcount in service operations and supply chain management. So we know there are some places where we'll start to see AI coming. But the thing to remember is that even as you're making cuts, it's becoming cheaper for you to provide those services, you're going to sell more of the services. And that's going to allow you to expand. And as you're expanding what you're selling, that's going to allow you to hire more people, right? And so this is the dance, which is as we become more productive, we can afford more. As we can afford more, we produce more. That increase in the scale offsets some of the fact that we are not needing the same number of people. So the ultimate question will be, how do we manage the short-run disruptions? We want to think about the distribution of work versus the distribution of income, and at some point We need to start to think about how do we plan for a future and ensure that everybody comes out of a massive disruption unscathed, and realizing that we might start to see a really important and big separation between our labor income and our capital income that might mean we need to think harder about what kinds of access people have to making money. So if you want to understand the disruption as an ownership problem, imagine that you own a robot that can do all of your work for you. Are you better off? Yes. Is your boss better off? No. You're sending the robot to work for you. Imagine that your employer owns a robot that can do all of your work without you. Are you better off? No. Is your boss better off? Yes. And one way to, I will tell you, I had an experience when I was in a ride share where I was talking about self-driving cars with the driver. And the driver was just telling me how terrible that would be, how awful it would be. The whole time he was telling me how terrible it was. And then I said, oh, but come on. Wouldn't you love it if you could just sit at home and send your autonomous vehicle out to pick me up and then just collect the paycheck at the end? And he just went dead silent. And he's like, well, I never thought about me owning the autonomous vehicle. So it's really an ownership issue. It's an ownership issue. If he owned the autonomous vehicle, all of a sudden, it sounded kind of good to him. So we don't have a robot problem or an AI problem. We definitely have an ownership problem. We also might want to think about a competition problem. Imagine that OpenAI, Google, Facebook, and many other competitors each own competing AI models that can do all of your work. Are you better off? No. Is your boss better off? Yes. Imagine that a monopoly AI company owns an AI model that can do all of your work. Are you better off? No. Is your boss better off? No. Is the monopolist better off? Yes. So we want to think about the competition problem. So I will end by saying invest in new skills wisely. And my hope is that this is where we retain our edge in science and critical thinking skills. Thank you.
Okay, if you have any questions, just put your hand up and we will come to you with a microphone.
Thank you for your very great talk. I'm Shilling. I'm from Department of Engineering Department, and I have one question about because my personal thinking of AI is that it is inevitable that I think maybe in 10 years or 20 years, the AI will be better than humans in almost all sorts of things, and in that case, in terms of competitivity, we do not have any advantages over AI. So I think something like UBI will ultimately be one issue to one policy to be implemented in our society. So I want to ask, what do you think of UBI, and at what time point do you think it will be appropriate to implement such kind of policies? Thank you.
So that's a great question, right? So if it's an income distribution problem, how do we solve it? And it took me a long time to understand there was a real reason why Silicon Valley was getting themselves all excited about UBI. I was like, what do these guys care about UBI for? And it's because they have this, they're like, oh, we're about to take everybody's job. Maybe we should leave them with something. I think the problem with UBI is because the vision of it got ahead of actually robots taking our job, it's hard to get the public to wrap themselves around the idea that everybody's just going to get a handout and stay at home and do nothing. That's why I said, like, we might want to rethink how we think about work, because it might not be work that's important, but it might be important that you are a productive member of your community in some way. And so I think we need to think about how we distribute income, but it might not be, let's mail everybody a check and tell them they've got no value in their community. It might be that we should think about things like the ownership problem, right? So if everybody owns a little bit of the technology and all the money's coming from returns to capital, we're all getting our returns, we're all getting a check. It's not a UBI check, but it is a shareholder check, right? And so then the question is, how do we distribute capital ownership? What would personally, I think we need to start, I think we have to move away from UBI, which I think has gotten characterized by connotations of welfare. And we need to talk about a digital dividend, that we're supplying data to these companies left, right, and center. And they owe me for that. So I want my digital dividend. Now we're talking about something I have a right to. And I think it changes the public conversation. So there's sort of two answers to that. One is, yes, we have to get people money, and it's not all going to come from labor income. You and I both agree with that, about that. That I think there is a marketing problem, as well as like a how we're organizing society problem, to think about how we get income into people's hands. And I think some of that's also going to have to come with how we structure society, so that we're building in activities that make people feel central, wanted, needed, and like they have a job to do. You don't need an income for that. You know, my family dog literally checks that the kids have gone to bed every night before he goes to bed. That's just like, it's a dog job. Check on your kids, make sure they've gone to bed, and then the dog can fall asleep. The dog doesn't get paid, but it's like his responsibility is always to check on the kids, right? So we can conceive of responsibilities and roles, social roles, that are not work. And so I think we're gonna have to do that, as well as solving the income problem.
You mentioned this towards the end of your talk, but you said there's an ownership issue. If there's a monopolist AI company, they will get all the returns. And we see this with the race to create the most powerful model by each company. And in a way, we can think it as like the battleship race. In the early 20th century, each country wanted to build more and more battleships until one cheaper, more effective technology replaced them. Do you think with AI we can see a similar case where not the smartest AI, but the one that is integrated within our workflow? Say, you said ChatGPT multiple times. Microsoft has Copilot with, like, that is ChatGPT that is wrapped around something, and it helps you write better in Word. Everyone in the world uses Word as their main word processor. So it's not that they will be investment to the better and better AIs that might actually replace our jobs, but eventually the returns to scale will not work, and they will slowly incorporate it, and it will get the low-hanging fruits. So similar to the solo problem you were mentioning.
So, I mean, there are definitely lots of risks out there. And I think the risk of, a single AI company that is smarter than humans. So we got we've got a room full of computer geniuses, and then they're all owned by one company. I think that's a risk. But I don't think that it's in any way inevitable. And I think right now what we're seeing is that the competition is sort of alive and well. And as the cost of training these models is going down, then it's not clear that one, big winner is going to arise. The thing that gives me hope is, in the late, in the 1980s, there was a saying, nobody ever gets fired for buying IBM. IBM dominated the personal computer market. IBM doesn't even sell personal computers anymore today. Like they literally failed. So they went from being the leader to failing. Why did they fail? Well, partially because cheap, competitors. Dell came in and was like, wait, we can do like direct-to-consumer sales and cut prices. But you've got the combination of innovation to make it better and then innovation to make it cheaper. And that is where you get competitive pressure. I think one of the things I worry most about is a regulatory framework that actually cements power. And I'm a pro-regulation person. I'll say, you guys already heard, like, I was an Obama economist. I think like a healthy economy runs with a lot of good regulation. But I also know that regulation risks creating monopolists by keeping other people out. And I think it's a real risk with AI. And so when I think the best thing we can do is make sure that we continue to support a flourishing competitive market by not giving anybody the upper hand, and by making sure that we are starting to build in appropriate revenue models from these companies, that we're taxing them right. Because right now, we're not taxing them correctly. And as a result, that's allowing them to grow more and more. And it, you would slow them down a little if we taxed them appropriately.
We meaning the U.S. government? Is that the we you're talking about, or what?
Yes, but a global minimum tax would help the whole world.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm Joshua Pickard. I work on AI research here, and I have a question sort of related to what's being discussed. But I'm really curious about the ownership problem you mentioned towards the end of the talk, and also the problem of the cost of human versus machines differing around the world. In some countries, human cost may or may not be different prices. Could you just say a little bit about how the ownership problem and that might be related to one another?
Yeah. So the biggest fear is that we don't distribute income, and a lot of people don't own capital, so they're not getting returns from capital. The share of income. So when we think about GDP, if you think about my little machine, GDP is the income we generate, and that some of that's due to the human beings, and some of it's due to the capital. What we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years is a tiny decline in what's called the labor share of income, which is not like some fancy word, it's just the share of that comes from the humans versus the share coming from the machines. So it's been, it used to be roughly 1/3 was due to machines and 2/3 was due to humans in the US, and that's been coming down a little bit. The fear is that it goes down a lot, and that the income becomes more and more and more and more due to the capital, and less and less and less due to labor. And then there's people who don't own any capital. So they don't own any capital, and their labor's not generating a lot of value. And so the problem is, how do you determine how much you're going to work for? You determine how much you're going to work for based on the opportunity cost of your time, right? So lots of people might say, this is why people often hate handouts. They say, oh, if you're giving people $600 a week to stay home, they're not going to want to go to work unless they're getting paid a lot more than $600 a week, because they're thinking about, should I work and get this amount or what? And the thing is, if you don't own any capital, the or what, if you don't have any other source of income, you're going to go to work or starve to death. And so the scariest models I've seen written down see human wages getting pushed down to subsistence levels, even in countries like the United States, for the non-capital owning people. And then wealth like you've never seen before for the capital owning people, because all the income is going to capital. And the people who work are producing stuff that's of so little value that their wages get driven down to the point of, should we buy a machine or give this person enough to feed them and keep them alive? And then what happens if their value goes below what it costs to keep them alive? Then you don't need the people anymore. But you solve that. You could end up eliminating work, but you wouldn't necessarily have that problem if everybody or you'd keep wages up. If everybody had an equal share of capital, then someone's saying, come work for $10 an hour. You're like, nah, not worth it. I have a pretty good standard of living from my capital income. What's going to make me go into the labor market? And if you need the human, maybe the human just has to turn the robot on, but you really need him to do that, you're going to end up paying them a lot. And that's something that's called Balmer's cost disease, which is if you need the humans, the wages go up, even if they're not that much more productive, but because their opportunity cost is going up. That's why you pay a string quartet a lot more today than you would have paid a string quartet 200 years ago, even though they're not more productive. But it's because what else could they be doing instead of playing in the string quartet has become a lot more valuable.
All right, we'll take one more question here.
Hi, I had a question about this last slide. Can we retain the edge here, and specifically about critical thinking skills? What does it mean to invest in these new skills? Because I really do see people already outsourcing their critical thinking to AI.
So I think the thing that's scariest is nobody like really knows like what are the skills that some of the skills we teach in college might be replaced, right? So we're like, oh, what do we do? But I think at the end of the day, one of the most important skill you learn in education is how to learn new things and how to come up with new ideas and how to question. And I am very skeptical that AI will ever be super good at criticizing itself. And so that's when I say critical thinking, it's like, what is it missing? What is it leaving out? What else could you be asking? What is it will come up with, one of the reasons it can be so innovative is it will come up with some new combination that nobody had ever thought of before, and you're like, whoa, but that's actually good. But who's judging whether it's good or not? And you sort of need, there's something that makes us human that allows us to assess, the difference between a brand new combination that feels genius and one that is ridiculous. And so I guess that's kind of what I mean. It's like I'll tell you what I honestly believe, like a lot of what I got a kid in high school and a kid in middle school, and I think their extracurriculars are doing as much for them as what they're learning in the classroom, because like my kids are doing like musical theater and art and sport, and these things are and they're having to make decisions on the fly, and I think those are really good and useful skills. And so, just like memorizing multiplication tables isn't as useful as it was pre-calculator, a lot of the like rote memorization that we've been teaching kids in primary school and high school, I think is going to have to, we need to move away from that a bit and focus more on making sure that kids are thinking creatively and independently.
Okay, can we have another round of applause for Professor Stevenson?